The Voyage of Unknowing, Nicholas of Cusa on Learned Ignorance. Written by David Christopher Lane, Andrea Diem Lane. Narrated by Paul Stefano. Introduction. I first encountered the mystical logic of Nicholas of Cusa when I read S. L. Frank's magnificent and underappreciated volume, The Unknowable. I was both mesmerized and haunted by Cusa's koan-like summation of his philosophy when he wrote, "The unattainable is attained by its unattainment." As Socrates and other mystic philosophers before him, Nicholas of Cusa had realized through mathematics and geometry that infinity cannot be comprehended by that which is finite. Thus, what is the best way to know that which exceeds us? By being profoundly learned in our own ignorance and understanding that unknowingness is the only pathway before us. This volume contains 2 elemental writings from Nicholas of Cusa, Dialogue on the Hidden God, and key excerpts from On Learned Ignorance. Both of these readings deserve a very close reading, since Cusa wrote in a compacted yet deeply pregnant fashion, providing an intellectual landscape of precious jewels of inquiry. I have now read Nicholas of Cusa for nearly 4 decades, and each time I find something new to contemplate. We have bookended Cusa's 2 selections with essays that were deeply influenced by his thinking. The first is entitled The Mystical Dimension, and demonstrates that even as science progresses over time, there will still remain a mystery, given the limits of our cranial capacities, and given the parameters of the universe's spatial and time-specific dimensions. The second essay, The Cerebral Mirage, is by Professor Andrea Diem, and touches upon neuroscience and evolution, illustrating how easy it is for us to be deceived, not only by others, but also by the very makeup of our neurology. In this regard, we must be keenly aware not to confuse our present brain state and what it conveys via its filtration system with absolute reality. Simply put, don't confuse map-making with the actual territory itself. The former is a navigating and useful tool, but as such can only lead so far. Nicholas of Cusa is perhaps the most radical thinker to remain within the Roman Catholic Church and not get excommunicated. It is surprising that he was not regarded as a heretic for his revolutionary ideas. As Giordano Bruno commented about him, had he not been hindered by his priest's vestment, he would have been even greater than Pythagoras. We have also made 2 short movies on Nicholas of Cusa's thought, On Learned Ignorance and Geometric Philosophy, which are available on the Neural Surf Revision YouTube channel. This is but a small appetizer of Nicholas of Cusa's ideas, and we recommend a fuller course by reading the following suggested books. 1. Nicholas of Cusa on Learned Ignorance, a translation and an appraisal of Didacta Ignorantia, by Jasper Hopkins. 2. Nicholas of Cusa, Selected Spiritual Writings, Classics of Western Spirituality, by H. Lawrence Bond. 3. The Unknowable, by S. L. Frank. Chapter 1. Mysterium Tremendum. There is a mystical dimension that runs through all aspects of life. Eventually, every human endeavor directly encounters an impenetrable mystery, where knowledge turns into ignorance and control into wonder. Indeed, no matter how much science or technology may advance, the essential mystery of life will never change. The reason why is simple. Reality is always greater than our conceptions of it. Thus, contrary to our popular notions of mysticism, genuine spiritual practice is not concerned with increasing knowledge per se, but rather reconciling man with his fundamental state of absolute ignorance. We are born into a mystery, we live in a mystery, and we die in a mystery. Although we may learn about things achieving various levels of technical proficiency, we apparently can never know what a single thing is. For instance, what ultimately is matter? What is a thought? What is a self? The essence of everything eludes us, because our perceptions are always limited. As the late Baba Fakir Chand, the great sage of Hoshiarpur, once told me personally, nature is unfathomable. No one has ever been able to know it completely. No one has known it. A small germ in a body cannot know the whole body. Similarly, a human being is like a small germ in a vast creation. How can he claim to have known the entire creation? Those who say that they have known are wrong. No one can describe or even know the entire creation. It is indescribable. Often in the philosophy classes I have taught in undergraduate and graduate school, I would bring up this point of unknowingness. Pointing to a crumpled piece of writing paper, I would ask the class, "What is this?" Almost in unison, the students would respond, "A piece of paper." Taking this as my cue to lead into a deeper philosophical investigation of materialism, I probed further. Yes, but what is that? Catching my drift, one student invariably answered, "Oh, it is actually a transformed sheet of wood." Not wanting them to stop there, I asked, "And wood is made of what?" "It's comprised of molecules," the more scientifically oriented students would shout. Connecting to the now forgotten inner space ride at Disneyland, which takes one through an imaginary voyage inside a snowflake molecule, I queried, "But what is a molecule made of?" By this time we had gotten down to the subatomic level, and our words began to betray our modicum of knowledge. Electrons, protons, quarks, Lucky Charms, superstring. The final question I asked was quite simple, but given the line of investigation, it led to some severe complications. What is matter? Well, it should be obvious to the reader, as it was to my class, and to myself, that there's only one truly appropriate response. I don't know. Now this is exactly the response not only of most mystics, but most quantum physicists as well. As Sir Arthur Eddington, the noted astronomer-physicist, put it, something unknown is doing we don't know what. To be sure, mystics have said that the world, or matter, is nothing but consciousness. But what is consciousness? Not even a sage as enlightened as Ramana Maharshi of South India could answer that question. To such queries, Ramana would often sit in silence. Ultimately, matter leads to consciousness, and consciousness to God, or nature, with a capital N, and both to mystery. However, no matter how you define it, slice it, categorize it, blend it, intuit it, the fact remains that reality is a mystery, and nobody, apparently, not me, not you, not Einstein, knows what that reality is. We are sitting right in the middle of a mystical dimension. Yet, instead of this unknowable realm being the basis for sorrow, it is in truth the foundation for man's freedom and liberation. Because by consciously surrendering to the transformative process of such native ignorance, our lives become enlivened and informed by existence. A crude yet perhaps accurate example of this new kind of mysticism, where science directs religion and not vice versa, can be seen in the analogy of the ocean and the bubble. The ocean, in this metaphorical case, represents the total reality of all that exists, call it God or nature or whatever, whereas the bubble, or self, or anything which is less than the totality of what arises, exemplifies a seemingly bound existence. Now, as the bubble, it has two primary options. 1. Surrender to the ocean, which is the creator, sustainer, and destroyer of its separate life. Or 2. Recoil and live in the illusory belief that as a bubble, it has a distinct, autonomous existence. While both postures are not mutually exclusive, the unassailable fact remains that the former option is our necessary endgame, whereas the latter position is to some measure our Darwinian necessity. It can be argued that self-realization is when the bubble intuits its subservience to the ocean, and that it has no real life except in relationship with the larger environment. However, there is one very important catch here. The bubble, self, must be prepared to burst in the sea, nature, from which it is manifested. The ultimate physics which brought us into the universe are the same physics which will draw us out of it. The real dilemma, therefore, is not that we will die, that is inevitable, even if we can extend our specific lifetimes, but how we will choose to live in such existential context. In what ways will we confront the mystery? In what ways will we seek to avoid it? Recently there has been a lot of discussion about how certain leading edges of science are rediscovering the mystical dimension. In physics, we find the strange world of photon entanglement. In neurophysiology, the processes of memory and altered states of awareness. In astronomy, the theory of black holes, antimatter, and inflating universes. And in biology, the intricate code of life, DNA, and the development of forms, morphology. But the rediscovery of that which remains unknown is a changing proposition, and reflects more on our own limited cranial capacities than on what the universe or multiverse ultimately portends. In other words, the deep mystery we must first confront is epistemological. We have a tendency to conflate our neurology for ontology, and as such tend to inflate the world around us with our own unrecognized projections, which may or may not be accurate. And since we are stuck to such map-making, we are circumscribed by a logical syllogism that on the surface seems intractable. All maps by definition are less than the territory to which they point. Because if the map is exactly as large as the land itself, then such a map would be superfluous, and thus have gaps. And if all maps invariably have gaps, then all such designs are inevitably, if only partially, mistaken. What this means, of course, is that all the delineations we make about the world around us are potentially wrong because they are not perfect transparencies. This is why science always rediscovers the unknowable, because no matter how sophisticated our maps may be, they will have a gap in them, which will reveal something hitherto undiscovered. This is also why Karl Popper's notion of falsifiability serves us so well when appraising most scientific theories. We know a priori that human speculations, even if amazingly well-grounded in physics or math, are always liable to error. It is this liability which, ironically, allows science to progress. A new technological product, for instance, isn't accepted as flawless, but is rather closely examined by hackers and others to reveal some uninspected flaws. And because of this ongoing dialectic, we have seen breathtaking changes in a variety of objects, from computers to cars. All academic subjects have their epistemological cul-de-sacs. In math, we have Gödel's incompleteness theorem, which essentially says consistency of such a system cannot be proved within the system. In physics, we have Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, or relations, which simply states it is impossible to know with absolute precision the momentum and position of an electron, since the more certain you are about an electron's position, the less certain you are about its momentum, and vice versa. In astronomy, we have the Einstein limit of light, which tells us that we can only see so far with our telescopes within the parameters of relativity. And the list goes on. Science will undoubtedly expand our previous limits and horizons, but we will inevitably be stuck with our own neural constraints from the very beginning. And herein lays the great human dilemma. The limits of our skull are the limits of our understanding. Yes, we may augment our brains with artificial devices in the future, but even here we will only confront a new limit in time. If we don't know what a single thing ultimately is, even if we can know various things about a material item, we are circumscribed in our knowledge about comprehending all of its various dimensions and interconnections. Do we even know where we are ultimately? Yes, I may say something such as I live in Huntington Beach, but that is merely a section in Southern California, which itself is part of a state of 50 in the United States, which is part of a continent that is located on a planet that orbits a sun some 93 million miles away. However, where is that sun? It is but part of a galaxy which is part of a huge Milky Way, which is expanding in a universe of untold size that some 13.8 billion years ago was collapsed into a space tinier than the 12-point size of the Garamond type on this page. Yet, where is that naked singularity located? Does it make any sense to even use such framing questions at this minuscule level? And if some theoretical physicists are correct, then this universe of ours isn't singular at all, but part of a multiverse of unimaginable dimensions. Where are we has a simple answer, it appears. We don't know. What this means is that even if we forego religion and spirituality and opt for a purely materialistic understanding of what surrounds us, we are still touching moment to moment a mystery that transcends our ability to grasp it. Which brings us to that most revealing of queries. Who or what is living us right now? Who or what is beating our hearts? Who or what is firing our neurons? Several immediate answers come to mind, of course, ranging from Jesus to biochemistry, but when we closely inspect how our bodies operate, we soon realize that our I has very little to do with the day-to-day functions of our life. We don't consciously grow the hair on our hands or digest our food. We witness something that supersedes us, even as it literally lives us. Whatever that is, of course, is unknowable in its entirety. Thus, we don't know what a single thing is, we don't know where we are, and we don't even know whom or what is actually living us. We live in a mystery, even as we act as if nothing is mysterious. In fact, the mystical dimension, or for example, ground of being, is both absolutely immanent and transcendent, itself being without form, though assuming form, without content, though manifesting content, without structure, though exhibiting structure. The mystical dimension is nothing less than paradoxal to the conventional mind, since by definition it both subsumes and transcends all conceptual frameworks. Ken Wilber describes it this way. The absolute, the mystical dimension, is both the highest state of being and the ground of being. It is both the goal of evolution and the ground of evolution, the highest stage of development and the reality or suchness of all stages of development, the highest of all conditions and the condition of all conditions, the highest rung in the ladder and the wood out of which the ladder is made. Anything less than that paradox generates either pantheistic reductionism on the one hand or wild and radical transcendentalism on the other. To face this mystery is truly an awesome task. Imagine being set down in the middle of the ocean at 12 midnight with 20 to 30-foot waves and having no life raft. The infamous surf spot known as Mavericks, located north of Santa Cruz in California, comes to mind here. How would you feel? The very idea sparks utter fear in most of us. Yet, right at this moment, as you read this page, the situation is not altogether different than that ocean. It is as if we are at the amusement park, getting strapped into a new roller coaster ride, and right before takeoff we are told by the operator that the ride ends in a ball of fire where we all die. Who could possibly enjoy such an attraction? Yet isn't this an apt description of our own present circumstance? We are going to end up dead, no matter how much we squiggle and squirm and resist. Earthquakes, hurricanes, diseases, accidents, the list is exhaustless, even if the final result is the exact same. So the real mystical question, as we mentioned previously, isn't that we are going to die. That is a certainty, even if we try to pretend otherwise. But how we are going to live in this temporary moment. That is the core of existentialism, and, interestingly, the core of all scientific and religious endeavors. The beauty of the mystical dimension is that it cannot be prefigured, or as I often remarked in my death and dying classes, if there really is a God, or truth, or ultimate concern, then he or she or it blows every conception that we have out the door. Yet it is precisely this unknowableness that constitutes our enlightenment. In every single moment of our existence we are seeing, feeling, smelling, hearing the mystery. The ultimate truth is not simply another, although this aspect too cannot be denied. But he or she or it is also this, the chair, the bed, the sky, the toothbrush. And in the midst of it all, we are natively ignorant. Such is the mystical dimension. Such is human life. Indeed, the curious irony that awaits us is this. The more we examine the mystical, the more physical it seems, and the more we examine the physical, the more mystical it appears. 'Tis all wonder, wonder, wonder. Wonder hath assumed a form. Chapter 2. Dialogue on the Hidden God, translated by William F. Wirtz, Jr. Gentile says, I see you bowed down full of reverence, shedding not false but rather heartfelt tears of love. I wish to know, who are you? Christian, I am a Christian. Gentile, whom do you adore? Christian, God. G, who is the God whom you adore? C, I do not know. G, how can you so earnestly adore what you do not know? C, because I do not know, I adore. G, I find it astonishing that a man is affected by something that he does not know. C, it is even more astonishing that a man is affected by something that he thinks he knows. G, why so? C, because he knows that which he believes he knows less than that, which he knows that he does not know. G, I beseech you to explain. G, whoever thinks he knows something, although one can know nothing, seems insane to me. G, it seems to me rather that you are entirely lacking in rationality, if you say that one can know nothing. C, I understand by knowledge, apprehension of the truth. Whoever says that he knows says he has apprehended the truth. G, I believe the same. C, then how can one apprehend the truth except through it itself? For it is not apprehended if the apprehending comes first and the apprehended afterwards. G, I do not understand why the truth cannot be apprehended except through itself. C, do you believe that it can be apprehended in another way and in something other? G, I think so. C, you are clearly in error. There is no truth outside of the truth, no circle outside of circularity, no man outside of humanity. Therefore, truth is not found outside of the truth, neither otherwise, nor in something other. G, how then is it known to me what a man is, what a stone is, and everything else of which I have knowledge? C, you know nothing of these, but only believe that you have knowledge. For if I questioned you about the quiddity of that, which you think you know, you would affirm that you cannot express the actual truth of man or the stone, but that you know the man is not a stone comes not from the knowledge through which you knew the man and the stone and their difference, but rather from their accidents, from the diversity of their actions and shapes, upon which, when you discern them, you impose diverse names. G, is there one, or are there several truths? C, there is only one, for there is only one unity, and truth coincides with unity, because it is true that there is only one unity. Just as only one unity is found in number, so only one truth is found in the many. And thus whoever does not attain unity will always be ignorant of number, and whoever does not attain truth in unity can know nothing truly. And although he believes he truly knows, he nevertheless easily experiences that which he believes he knows, can be known more truly. For instance, the visible can be seen more truly than it is seen by you. It will indeed be more truly seen by more acute eyes. Hence, it is not seen by you as the visible is in truth. It is the same with hearing and other senses. However, since everything which is known, but not with that knowledge with which it can be known, is not known in truth, but rather otherwise and in another way. However, since otherwise and in another way from the way which is the truth is not known, he is insane who believes he knows something in truth and is ignorant of the truth. Is not the blind man judged to be insane who believes he knows the distinctions of color when he is ignorant of colors? G. Which man then is knowing, if one can know nothing? C. One is appraised to be knowing, who knows his ignorance, and only he will revere the truth who knows that he can apprehend nothing without it, neither being, nor living, nor understanding. G. Perhaps it is that which attracts you to adoration, namely the desire to be in the truth. C. Exactly this, which you say, for I worship God, not him, whom you Gentiles falsely name and think you know, but rather God himself, who is the ineffable truth itself. G. Now since you, brother, worship the God who is truth, and since we do not intend to worship a God who is not God in truth, I ask you, what is the difference between you and us? C. There are many differences, but the greatest one of these is that we worship the absolute, unmixed, eternal, and ineffable truth itself. You, however, do not worship it as it is, absolute in itself, but rather as it is in its actions, not absolute unity, but rather unity in number and multitude. And you are in error, for the truth, which is God, is not communicable to another. G. I ask you, brother, to lead me to it, so that I can understand that which you know about your God. Answer me, what do you know about the God whom you adore? C. I know that everything which I know is not God, and that everything I conceive is no compassion to him, but rather he excels it. G. Therefore God is nothing. C. He is not nothing, for even this nothing has the name nothing. G. If he is not nothing, is he therefore something? C. He is also not something, for something is not everything. However, God is not something rather than everything. G. Astonishingly, you affirm the God whom you adore is neither nothing nor something that no rationality comprehends. C. God is above nothing and something. The nothing obeys him so that it becomes something. And this is his omnipotence, through which power he exceeds everything, which is or is not, and that which is and that which is not obeys him in like manner. For he causes not being to pass over into being, and being into not being. Therefore he is nothing of those things which are under him, and which his omnipotence precedes. And since everything comes from him, one can no more call him this than that. G. He cannot be named at all? C. What is named is small. He whose magnitude cannot be conceived remains ineffable. G. Is he therefore ineffable? C. He is not ineffable, but rather above everything effable, since he is the cause of everything nameable. How could he who gives a name to others himself remain without a name? G. Therefore he is both effable and ineffable. C. This neither. For God is not the root of contradiction, but rather he is the simplicity prior to every root. Hence one also cannot say that he is effable and ineffable. G. What then do you say concerning him? C. That he is neither named nor not named, nor named and not named, but rather that everything which can be said, disjunctive and copulative, in agreement or contradiction on account of the excellence of his infinity, does not correspond to him. He is the one origin before any formable cogitation concerning him. G. Therefore God does not correspond to being? C. You speak correctly. G. He is therefore nothing. C. He is neither nothing, nor is he not, nor is he and he is not. Rather, he is the font and the origin of all principles of being and not being. G. Is God the font of the principles of being and not being? C. No. G. But you have just stated this. C. I have said the truth when I said it, and now say the truth when I deny it. For if there are principles of being and not being, then God precedes them. But not being does not have as its principle not being, but rather being. For not being needs a principle in order to be. Therefore being is the principle of not being, because not being does not exist without it. G. Is God not truth? C. No, rather he precedes all truth. G. Is he something other than truth? C. No, for otherness does not befit him. Rather, he is infinitely more excellent than everything that is conceived and named by us as truth. G. Do you not name God God? C. We name him thus. G. Are you speaking truly or falsely? C. Neither the one nor both. For we do not say the true if we say that this is his name, and we do not say something false, for it is not false that it is his name. And we also do not say the truth and the false, for his simplicity precedes everything nameable and not nameable. G. Why do you name him God, although you are ignorant of his name? C. On account of the similitude to perfection. G. I beseech you to explain. C. The name God or Deus comes from theoro, which means I see. For God is in our domain, as vision is in the domain of color. Color can only be attained through vision, and so that any color whatsoever could be attained, the center of vision is without color. In the domain of color, therefore, vision is not found that is without color. Hence, in regard to the domain of color, vision is nothing rather than something. For the domain of color does not attain being outside its domain, but rather asserts that everything, which is inside its domain. And there it does not find vision. Vision, which exists without color, is therefore unnameable in the domain of color, since the name of no color corresponds to it. But vision gives every color its name through distinction. Hence all denomination in the domain of color depends on vision, and yet we have discovered that the name of him, from whom all names exist, is nothing rather than something. Therefore, God is to everything, as sight is to the visible. G. What you have said pleases me. I understand clearly that in the domain of all creatures neither God nor his name is to be found, and that God escapes every conception, rather than be affirmed as something, since as something that does not possess the condition of a creature, he cannot be found in the domain of creatures. Also, one does not find the not composed in the domain of the composed, and all names which are names of composition. However, the composed is not from itself, but rather from that which precedes all composition. And although the domain of the composed and everything composed are through this, that which they are, nevertheless, since it is not composed, it is unknown in the domain of the composed. Therefore may God, hidden from the eyes of all the wise men of this world, be praised in eternity. Chapter 3. On Learned Ignorance. 1. For the naturalists state that a certain unpleasant sensation in the opening of the stomach precedes the appetite, in order that, having been stimulated in this way, the nature, which endeavors to preserve itself, will replenish itself. By comparison, I consider wondering, on whose account there is philosophizing, to precede the desire for knowing, in order that the intellect, whose understanding is its being, will perfect itself by the study of truth. Unusual things, even if they be monstrous, are accustomed to move us. For this reason, zero unparalleled teacher, deem according to your kindness, that something worthwhile lies hidden herein. And in regard to divine matters, receive from a German a mode of reasoning such as the following, a mode which great labor has rendered very pleasing to me. 2. However, all those who make an investigation judge the uncertain proportionally, by means of a comparison with what is taken to be certain. Therefore, every inquiry is comparative and uses the means of comparative relation. Now, when the things investigated are able to be compared by means of a close proportional tracing back to what is taken to be certain, our judgment apprehends easily. But when we need many intermediate steps, difficulty arises, and hard work is required. These points are recognized in mathematics, where the earlier propositions are quite easily traced back to the first and most evident principles, but where later propositions are traced back with more difficulty, because they are traced back only through the mediation of the earlier ones. Therefore, every inquiry proceeds by means of a comparative relation, whether an easy or a difficult one. Hence the infinite qua infinity is unknown, for it escapes all comparative relation. 3. But since comparative relation indicates an agreement in some one respect, and at the same time indicates an otherness, it cannot be understood independently of number. Accordingly, number encompasses all things related comparatively, Therefore, a number, which is a necessary condition of comparative relation, is present not only in quantity, but also in all things which in any matter whatsoever can agree or differ either substantially or accidentally. Perhaps for this reason Pythagoras deemed all things to be constituted and understood through the power of numbers. Both the precise combinations in corporeal things and the congruent relating of known to unknown surpass human reason, to such an extent that Socrates seemed to himself to know nothing except that he did not know. And the very wise Solomon maintained that all things are difficult and inexplainable in words. 4. And a certain other man of divine spirit says that wisdom and the seat of understanding are hidden from the eyes of all the living. Even the very profound Aristotle, in his first philosophy, asserts that in things most obvious by nature such difficulty occurs for us as for a night owl which is trying to look at the sun. Therefore, if the foregoing points are true, then since the desire in us is not in vain, assuredly we desire to know what we do not know. If we can fully attain unto this, knowledge of our ignorance, we will attain unto learned ignorance. For a man, even one very well versed in learning, will attain unto nothing more perfect than to be found to be most learned in the ignorance which is distinctively his. The more he knows that he is unknowing, the more learned he will be. Unto this end I have undertaken the task of writing a few things about learned ignorance. 5. Since I am going to discuss the maximum learning of ignorance, I must deal with the nature of maximality. Now I give the name maximum to that than which there cannot be anything greater. But fullness befits what is one. Thus oneness, which is also being, coincides with maximality. But if such oneness is altogether free from all relation and contraction, obviously nothing is opposed to it, since it is absolute maximality. Thus the maximum is the absolute one, which is all things. And all things are in the maximum, for it is the maximum. And since nothing is opposed to it, the minimum likewise coincides with it. And hence the maximum is also in all things. And because it is absolute, it is, actually, every possible being. It contracts nothing from things, all of which derive from it. In the first book I shall strive to investigate incomprehensibly above human reason this maximum, which the faith of all nations indubitably believes to be God. I shall investigate with the guidance of Him who alone dwells in inaccessible light. 6. Secondly, just as absolute maximality is absolute being, through which all things are that which they are, so from absolute being there exists a universal oneness of being which is spoken of as a maximum deriving from the absolute maximum, existing from it contractedly, and as a universe. The maximum's oneness is contracted in plurality, and it cannot exist without plurality. Indeed, in its universal oneness this maximum encompasses all things, so that all the things which derive from the absolute maximum are in this maximum, and this maximum is in all these things. Nevertheless, it does not exist independently of the plurality in which it is present, for it does not exist without contraction, from which it cannot be freed. In the second book I will add a few points about this maximum, viz. The universe. Thirdly, a maximum of a third sort will thereafter be exhibited, for since the universe exists in plurality, only contractedly, we shall seek among the many things the one maximum in which the universe actually exists most greatly and most perfectly as in its goal. Now such a maximum is united with the absolute maximum, which is the universal end. It is united because it is a most perfect goal, which surpasses our every capability. However, someone who desires to grasp the meaning must elevate his intellect above the import of the words, rather than insisting upon the proper significations of words which cannot be properly adapted to such great intellectual mysteries. Moreover, it is necessary to use guiding illustrations in a transcendent way, and to leave behind perceptible things, so that the reader may readily ascend onto simple intellectuality. I have endeavored, for the purpose of investigating this pathway, to explain matters to those of ordinary intelligence as clearly as I could. Avoiding all roughness of style, I show at the outset that learned ignorance has its basis in the fact that the precise truth is inapprehensible. 8. It is self-evident that there is no comparative relation of the infinite to the finite. Therefore, it is most clear that where we find comparative degrees of greatness, we do not arrive at the unqualifiedly maximum, for things which are comparatively greater and lesser are finite, but necessarily such as maximum is infinite. Therefore, if anything is posited which is not the unqualifiedly maximum, it is evident that something greater can be posited. And since we find degrees of equality, so that one thing is more equal to a second thing, then to a third, in accordance with generic, specific, spatial, causal, and temporal agreement and difference among similar things. Obviously, we cannot find two or more things which are so similar and equal that they could not be progressively more similar ad infinitum. Hence, the measure and the measured, however equal they are, will always remain different. Therefore, it is not the case that by means of likenesses, a finite intellect can precisely attain the truth about things, for truth is not something more or something less, but it is something indivisible. 9. Whatever is not truth cannot measure truth precisely. By comparison, a non-circle cannot measure a circle, whose being is something indivisible. Hence, the intellect, which is not truth, never comprehends truth so precisely that truth cannot be comprehended infinitely more precisely. For the intellect is to truth as an inscribed polygon is to the inscribing circle. The more angles the inscribed polygon has, the more similar it is to the circle. However, even if the number of its angles is increased ad infinitum, the polygon never becomes equal to the circle, unless it is resolved into an identity with the circle. Hence, regarding truth, it is evident that we do not know anything other than the following, viz., that we know truth not to be precisely comprehensible as it is. For truth may be likened unto the most absolute necessity, which cannot be either something more or something less than it is. And our intellect may be likened unto possibility. Therefore the quiddity of things, which is the truth of beings, is unattainable in its purity. Though it is sought by all philosophers, it is found by no one as it is. And the more deeply we are instructed in this ignorance, the closer we approach to truth. 10. The absolute maximum with which the minimum coincides is understood incomprehensibly, since the unqualifiedly and absolutely maximum, than which there cannot be a greater, is greater than we can comprehend, because it is infinite truth. We attain unto it in no other way than incomprehensibly. For since it is not of the nature of those things which can be comparatively greater and lesser, it is beyond all that we can conceive. For whatsoever things are apprehended by the senses, by reason, or by intellect, differ both within themselves and in relation to one another, differ in such that there is no precise equality among them. Therefore, maximum equality, which is neither other than nor different from anything, surpasses all understanding. Hence, since the absolutely maximum is all that which can be, it is altogether actual. And just as there cannot be a greater, so for the same reason there cannot be a lesser, since it is all that which can be. But the minimum is that than which there cannot be a lesser. And since the maximum is also such, it is evident that the minimum coincides with the maximum. The foregoing point will become clearer to you if you contract maximum and minimum to quantity. For maximum quantity is maximally large, and minimum quantity is maximally small. Therefore, if you free maximum and minimum from quantity by mentally removing large and small, you will see clearly that maximum and minimum coincide. For maximum is a superlative, just as minimum is a superlative. Therefore, it is not the case that absolute quantity is maximum quantity, rather than minimum quantity. For in it, the minimum is the maximum coincidingly. 11. Therefore, opposing features belong only to those things which can be comparatively greater and lesser. They befit these things in different ways, but they do not at all befit the absolutely maximum, since it is beyond all opposition. Therefore, because the absolutely maximum is absolutely and actually all things which can be, and is so free of all opposition that the minimum coincides with it, it is beyond both all affirmation and all negation. And it is not, as well as is, all that which is conceived to be, and it is, as well as is not, all that which is conceived not to be. But it is a given thing in such way that it is all things, and it is all things in such way that it is no thing, and it is maximally a given thing in such way that it is minimally. For example, to say God, who is absolute maximality, is light, is to say no other than God is maximally light in such way that he is minimally light. For absolute maximality could not be actually all possible things, unless it were infinite, and were the boundary of all things, and were unable to be bounded by any of these things, as, by the graciousness of God, I will explain in subsequent sections. However, the absolutely maximum transcends all our understanding, for our intellect cannot by means of reasoning combine contradictories in their beginning, since we proceed by means of what nature makes evident to us. Our reason falls short of this infinite power, and is unable to connect contradictories which are infinitely distant. Therefore we see incomprehensibly beyond all rational inference that absolute maximality, to which nothing is opposed and with which the minimum coincides, is infinite. But maximum and minimum, as used in this first book, are transcendent terms of absolute signification, so that in their absolute simplicity they encompass, beyond all contraction to quantity of mass or quantity of power, all things. 12. From these considerations it is most clearly evident that the absolutely maximum is both incomprehensibly understandable and unnamably nameable. Anything than which a greater or a lesser cannot be posited cannot be named. For by the movement of our reason names are assigned to things, which in terms of comparative relation can be comparatively greater or lesser. And since all things exist in the best way they are able to exist, there cannot be a plurality of beings independently of number. For if number is removed, the distinctness, order, comparative relation, and harmony of things cease, and the very plurality of beings ceases. But if number itself were infinite, in which case it would be actually maximal, and the minimum would coincide with it, all of these would likewise cease, since to be infinite number and to be minimally number, for example not at all to be number, amount to the same thing. Therefore, if in ascending the scale of numbers we actually arrive at a maximum number, since number is finite, still we do not come to a maximum number than which there can be no greater number, for such a number would be infinite. Therefore it is evident that the ascending number scale is actually finite, and that the arrived at maximum number would be in potentiality relative to another greater number. But if on the descending scale of a similar thing held true of number, so that for any actually posited small number, a smaller number were always positable by subtraction, just as on the ascending scale, a larger number is always possible by addition, then the outcome would still be the same, as in the case where number were infinite. For there would be no distinction of things, nor would any order or any plurality or any degrees of comparatively greater and lesser be found among numbers. Indeed, there would not be number. Therefore in numbering it is necessary to come to a minimum than which there cannot be a lesser, viz. Oneness. And since there cannot be anything lesser than oneness, oneness will be an unqualifiedly minimum, which by virtue of the considerations just presented, coincides with the maximum. 13. However, oneness cannot be number, for number, which can be comparatively greater, cannot at all be either an unqualifiedly minimum or an unqualifiedly maximum. Rather, oneness is the beginning of all number, because it is the minimum, and it is the end of all number, because it is the maximum. Therefore, by comparison, absolute oneness, to which nothing is opposed, is absolute maximality, which is the blessed God. Since this oneness is maximal, it cannot be multiple, for it is all that which can be. Therefore it cannot become number. See that by means of number we have been led to understanding, 1. That absolute oneness quite closely befits the unnamable God, and 2. That God is so one that he is actually everything which is possible. Accordingly, absolute oneness cannot be comparatively greater or lesser, nor can it be multitude, thus deity is infinite oneness. Therefore the quiddity of things, which is the truth of beings, is unattainable in its purity. Though it is sought by all philosophers, it is found by no one as it is. And the more deeply we are instructed in this ignorance, the closer we approach to truth. Nicholas of Cusa, on Learned Ignorance. Chapter 4. The Cerebral Mirage. If one really believes in the infinite, one has entered into a realm of mystery, where intelligence soon becomes a trespasser. In any acceptance of infinite mystery, a certain agnosticism is inherent. Robert Sencourt. One of the most significant discoveries of modern science is that the world we perceive around us is not as it appears. Rather, neuroscience, evolutionary biology, and quantum physics have demonstrated that our day-to-day reality is a relative construct built upon a scaffolding of information bits that betray their real origin and causation. For instance, the other day I remarked to my oldest son Sean that the ocean water around Catalina Island looked exceptionally blue. But, given his deep knowledge of science, my son responded that such blueness was actually not in the water at all, but how different light waves get absorbed and refracted. The colors we see are due to the spectral properties of light. The longer wavelengths of light, such as red, orange, and yellow, are more readily captured by H2O, whereas the shorter wavelength of light, such as blue, gets refracted, and thus we see the color blue, particularly if the water is clear. But the scientific explanation for why an ocean is blue or a sunset is red is precisely not how we tend to experience such at first glance. In other words, the way we apprehend the world around us is not necessarily how we later comprehend it through scientific analysis. And herein lies the great divide, the great deception. or what early Indian recedes insignificantly called Maya. We live in a magic land, where all that manifests and appears real and certain is anything but. Yet the idea that the world is an illusion is not a new insight or the exclusive discovery of modern science, but actually dates back to the beginning of human civilization. Ancient seers in India and Greece and the Middle East wrote extensively about nature's inherent trickery. Plato's allegory of the cave is perhaps the most illustrative example of how the world of shadows conceals man's real contextual situation. As Plato explained through the mouthpiece of his teacher Socrates, "And now," I said, "let me show in a figure how far our nature is enlightened or unenlightened. Behold, human beings living in an underground den, which has a mouth open towards the light and reaching all along the den. Here they have been from their childhood, and have legs and necks chained so that they cannot move, and can only see before them, being prevented by the chains from turning round their heads. Above and behind them a fire is blazing at a distance, and between the fire and the prisoners there is a raised way, and you will see, if you look, a low wall built along the way, like the screen which marionette players have in front of them, over which they show the puppets. And do you see," I said, "men passing along the wall, carrying all sorts of vessels and statues and figures of animals made of wood and stone and various materials, which appear over the wall. Some of them are talking, others silent. Thus the prisoners see only shadows cast by images of real things, not even shadows cast by real things themselves." In India, Vedantists, particularly those of the Advaita persuasion, have argued that the world of appearance is a beguiling illusion which hides the truth of the universe's real essence, and as such it is akin to the curtain in the movie version of The Wizard of Oz, where a balloonist from Kansas plays out his antics in order to gain power and respect, which deceives by hiding that which is behind it. Likewise, in early schools of Gnosticism, they saw the world as the manifestation of a demiurge that entraps all who succumb to its tempting guises. The higher truth is lost because one believes that the image to be real, whereas it is merely a secondary power. What early philosophers and mystics understood, even if they couldn't articulate it scientifically, was that humankind was under the spell of a cerebral mirage, one that gave a false sense of knowledge and certainty. Although religious thinkers of differing persuasions drew out most of these ancient insights, it has turned out to be remarkably prescient in light of modern science. Interestingly, our advanced technology provides us with a very apt metaphor for how the world of our senses belies what lies underneath. Take a current smartphone, such as an iPhone 7, and almost all of us simply stay at the level of its user interface. We tap and swipe at the screen, opening up a vast array of applications that lead us into a wonderland of Angry Birds, Doodle Buddies, Facebook, Instagram, Flipboard, ad infinitum. And in each of these little islands of entertainment we become enveloped into virtual worlds, never pausing to reflect that it is all being engineered at a much deeper level, behind the screen, by software programmers using computer languages such as Objective-C and Cocoa Java. The user interface is, to invoke Plato's allegory, our cave, and we don't even know we are prisoners to the operating system, which unwittingly constrains our movements in a pre-designed template. Aldous Huxley prophesied in the 1930s, in A Brave New World, how we would be enslaved by a variety of amusements. Similarly, the app entraps us by giving us an illusory sense of latitude. As Zadie Smith rightly opined when analyzing the lure of Facebook worldwide, we enjoy the fruits of a social network without realizing that we are not living out our own dreams, but we live within one engineered by a 20-year-something named Mark Zuckerberg. But even the programmers themselves are constrained within the languages they use, which are usually pre-given before they employ them. I remember learning Unix at UCSD back in 1984 and feeling a euphoric sense of freedom, since it freed me from the mechanical boundaries of a Selectric typewriter. But then, as I became more proficient in using the language, I confronted its own limitations and realized anew that I was also bounded with another preset coding system. Even when programming, we sometimes forget that all we are really doing is manipulating a binary system of zeros and ones, which is the fundamental basis of all computation, brilliantly articulated by Alan Turing back in 1936 in his famous paper on computable numbers. And binary coding is geometrically portioned within silicon chips, guided and controlled by the transference of electrons from one signal point to another. What we are witnessing, interestingly, is a nested hierarchy: hardware, software, programming, user interface, etc. But for most of us, we know little if nothing besides the smartphone's display screen. This is true whether we are using Amazon's Kindle Fire, Microsoft's Surface, Google's Chromebooks, or Apple's latest iteration of the iPad. We are surface surfers in the techno world, and we remain dutifully oblivious of all the subterranean caverns that lurk within. Analogously, our brain has several layers of parallel processing systems. However, we tend only to be aware of our own surface-level consciousness, and such oscillate between Gerald Edelman's first and second nature, extended present-moment sentience, or self-reflective or self-conscious awareness. We remain almost completely incognizant of unconscious processes that take place moment to moment within our own neuroanatomies, whether it is the circulation of blood and our pumping hearts, or the firing of neurons within our cerebral cortex. We are, in essence, strangers to our own genetic programming. In this way, it can be argued that we are predominantly occupied with the human user interface, what we commonly call the waking state. The 9 orifices of our body receive incoming data streams, and we react accordingly, depending on the waves and intensity of information that impacts us. But for the most part, we are not aware, even for seconds, about how these data streams get appropriately channeled. We are witnesses to an ongoing process that seldom requires our deepest attention. And even when our body demands our immediate and undivided attention, we are often helpless to do anything, since the operating system of being human, OSOBH, is beyond our conscious reach. This is why there has been a history of missteps in medicine throughout the centuries, and why, in turn, we have yet to solve even the most mundane of illnesses, such as the common cold. Back in the 1980s, as an undergraduate student at UCSD, I conducted a research study on behalf of my then mentor, V.S. Ramachandran, who has become famous worldwide for his pioneering work on the brain and visual perception. He was curious about how the brain could produce a singular impression of an object, when in fact distinct channels within the visual cortex were processing the information related to it. We conducted a number of fairly simple but nevertheless sophisticated experiments to better pinpoint how the brain uses impressionistic and filling-in procedures so as to best compute color and motion and synchronize them as a whole, even though processed by different channels. As Ramachandran concluded in his August 1987 paper published in Nature, this strategy allows economy of information processing and also ensures perceptual synchronization of form and color as the object moves. But most tellingly, our sense of a unified field of awareness remains oblivious of all the machinations and shorthand tricks that go on behind the scenes. We are ignorant of the unconscious programs, so to say, and are only dutifully conscious of the illusory but highly beneficial result. Emerson elaborated on the varietals of illusions we confront in our lifetime. There are deceptions of the senses, deceptions of the passions, and the structural, beneficent illusions of sentiment and of the intellect. There is the illusion of love, which attributes to the beloved person all which that person shares with his or her family, sex, age, or condition, nay, with the human mind itself. 'Tis these which the lover loves, and Anna Matilda gets the credit of them. As if one shut up always in a tower with one window, through which the face of heaven and earth could be seen, should fancy that all the marvels we beheld belong to that window. There is the illusion of time, which is very deep. Who has disposed of it? Or come to the conviction that what seems a succession of thought is only the distribution of wholes into casual series. The intellect sees that every atom carries the whole of nature, that the mind opens to omnipotence, that in the endless striving and ascents, the metamorphosis is entire, so that the soul doth not know itself in its own act, when that act is perfected. There is illusion that shall deceive even the performer of the miracle. Though he make his body, he denies that he makes it. Though the world exists from thought, thought is daunted in presence of the world. One after the other we accept the mental laws, still resisting those which follow, which however must be accepted. But all our concessions only compel us to new profusion. And what avails it that science has come to treat space and time as simply forms of thought, and the material world as hypothetical, and withal our pretension of property and even of selfhood are fading with the rest, if at last even our thoughts are not finalities, but the incessant flowing and ascension reach these also, and each thought which yesterday was a finality, today is yielding to a larger generalization? We live on the outer perimeter of our own bodies, and thus still remain aliens to our own home. No wonder the human species is a jumbled morass of confusion. To echo the words of Nietzsche, the world suffers from paroxysms of madness, and it only because of this that life becomes somewhat understandable. Socrates may have been considered wise to admonish us to know thyself, but how can we know ourself when the greatest part of who we are remains hidden from view? Our consciousness is merely the topography of a vast ocean, something that Freud understood all too well. But psychoanalysis notwithstanding, the greatest difficulty we confront is that we have evolved not necessarily to understand how the universe works, but to find ways and means to survive within it. In this way, much of our unraveling of the human condition will be counterintuitive. and what we may assume to be true and evidential on the surface may on deeper inspection turn out to be something quite different. This may partially explain why such movies as The Matrix have become philosophically popular worldwide, since they touch upon a universal idea that we live in a veiled cosmos and that our body-brain complex perennially tricks us. Right now in this very room there are innumerable channels of potential knowledge, but we only access a minute portion of them. Depending on the limits of our receiving set, in our case the triune brain, we can only tune in to a certain set of frequencies, and from this limited data set we extrapolate and pontificate about the world and its ultimate meaning and purpose. Yet, we would immediately recognize the absurdity of our quest if we look at any other animal and imagine how they would ultimately interpret reality. Do we really think that a cow, a dog, or a dolphin, given their respective cranial limits, can deduce how and why they behave or think as they do? Or do we immediately cognize that the limits of their skull are to some measures the limits of their respective worlds? This does not suggest, of course, that an external reality apart from our bodies doesn't exist, or that we are consciously creating our own mini-realities, but only that our filtering mechanisms are not uber-clear transparencies for how things are. Rather, our brains developed from a biological sense as eco-adapters to eke out a living within the local environment, so as to best navigate its relative survival, at least long enough to produce viable offspring. Therefore, any deep understanding of human cognition must first understand the historical context from which it initially arose over time. Simply put, a theory of human consciousness necessitates a deep understanding of biological evolution and natural selection, since it is the guiding mechanism for why certain species flourish and others decay into extinction. Consciousness, therefore, is a contextual medium as well as a communicative one. Hence, one's awareness is invariably related to keeping one's body alive long enough so as to ensure progeny. Self-reflective awareness, in other words, doesn't arise within a sterile vacuum, but is the result of a long history of survival successes, since those who didn't withstand nature's cruel and unrelenting competitive game are no longer genetic contenders. All this serves as a necessary prelude to understand the inherent difficulties in developing a robust science of mysticism. All too often, the mystic quest wants to bracket away the physics of awareness, neglecting how and why consciousness emerged as a virtual simulator to better map out future competitive strategies and thereby increase its survival rate. More importantly, the inner journey isn't a pure and unadulterated glimpse into higher realities as such, since what we experience within is also bounded by a whole series of poorly understood pathways. If our brains evolved to neurally trick us so as to better help us make immediate judgments and future predictions in order to live an extra day, then we should be doubly cautious with what magnificent tricks it has in store for us when we penetrate into different realms of awareness. Ralph Waldo Emerson, in a section of The Conduct of Life, circa 1860, captures this human dilemma quite well when he wrote, "Society does not love its unmaskers." It was wittily, if somewhat bitterly, said by d'Alembert, "Qu'un état de vapeur était un état très fâcheux, parce qu'il n'ose facet voir les choses comme elles sont." I find men victims of illusion in all parts of life. Children, youths, adults, and old men are all led by one bauble or another. Yoganidra, the goddess of illusion, Proteus or Momus, or Gilfy's mocking, for the power has many names, is stronger than the Titans, stronger than Apollo. Few have overheard the gods or surprised their secret. Life is a succession of lessons which must be lived to be understood. All is riddle, and the key to a riddle is another riddle. There are as many pillows of illusion as flakes in a snowstorm. We wake from one dream into another dream. The toys, to be sure, are various and are graduated in refinement to the quality of the dupe. The intellectual man requires a fine bait. The sots are easily amused. But everybody is drugged with his own frenzy. And the pageant marches at all hours, with music and banner and badge. What all this portends, and the wise counsel it engenders, is that each one of us is on open quest, whether we be mystics or scientists, and whatever discoveries we make on the way, we must be cautious not to be dogmatic in our pronouncements, knowing too well how limited our understanding may be at any particular point in time, and how easy nature can trick us in her multifarious fashions. Nicholas of Cusa, writing in Latin, called this proglamena, on learned ignorance, and famously quipped, paradoxically as it may at first sound, that the unattainable was attained by its unattainment. We are better educated, in other words, when we realize how little we know. Or as Nicholas of Cusa himself penned, "For a man, even one very well versed in learning will attain unto nothing more perfect than to be found to be most learned in the ignorance which is distinctively his. The more he knows that he is unknowing, the more learned he will be. The warning shot for would-be mystics is that we are under the spell of a cerebral mirage, and to understand what consciousness is, we must first come to grips with its beguiling and deceptive nature. As a child, I was fascinated by a set of Chinese boxes, which contained smaller boxes hidden within it. However, I couldn't access all the boxes at once, since each were locked by a secret panel that I had to discover and then unlatch. Recently, there has been much pointed, if controversial, discussion in astrophysics about how our universe may be a subset of something much grander, but which is clouded from view. Razieh Porasan, Nyayesh Afsordi, and Robert B. Mann, in a recent paper published in the Journal of Cosmology and Astroparticle Physics, theorized that our three-dimensional universe emerged as a consequence of the formation of a black hole in a higher dimensional universe, but which is cloaked by something similar to an event horizon. In a more popularized version of their thesis, The Black Hole at the Beginning of Time, in the August issue of Scientific American, the authors propose that the Big Bang is a cosmic mirage. Our picture would cloak the singularity at the Big Bang just as an event horizon cloaks the singularity at the heart of a black hole. In this sense, we are living in a three-dimensional holographic image of a four-dimensional parent universe. We are, and not just metaphorically, the descendants of a cosmic beginning for which we have no direct access. The rishis of old had long felt that something was deeply amiss about our understanding of reality, and that a deeper truth remained obscured from view. Today, scientists from almost all different fields have come to a similar conclusion, albeit with a whole array of supporting evidences to back up their claims. It looks as if we are indeed lost in an almost infinite labyrinth, as envisioned by Jorge Borges. We live in a set of Chinese boxes, falsely presuming that we have reached the limit of such encasements. That which we know is a little thing. That which we do not know is immense. Pierre Simon de Laplace. Chapter 5. Nicholas of Cusa. Nicholas of Cusa. Nicholas of Cusa, or Cues, Latinized as Cusa, was the second of 4 children of Johann Krebs, or Krivitz, and Katharina Raymer. His father was a prosperous boat owner and ferryman. He entered the University of Heidelberg in 1416 as a cleric of the Diocese of Trier, studying the liberal arts. He then received his doctorate in canon law from the University of Padua in 1423. Afterwards, he entered the University of Cologne in 1425 as a doctor of canon law, which it appears he both taught and practiced there. Following this brief period in Cologne, he became secretary to Otto of Ziegenhain, the Archbishop of Trier, and represented him in Rome in 1427. After the death of Otto, during the period when the Archbishopric of Trier was contested by opposing parties, he attended the Council of Basel, 1431-49, representing Ulrich von Manderschneid, one of the claimants. While present at the council, Nicholas wrote De Discordantia Catholica, a synthesis of ideas on church and empire balancing hierarchy with consent. This work remained useful to critics of the papacy long after Nicholas left Basel. Nicholas was close to Cardinal Giuliano Cesarini, who had tried to reconcile Pope and Council, combining reform and hierarchic order. Nicholas supported transfer of the council to Italy to meet with the Greeks, who needed aid against the Ottoman Turks. He supported Pope Eugenius IV in his effort to bring the Eastern churches into union with the Western at such a council of union. While returning from a mission to Constantinople to persuade the Greeks to attend the Council of Florence, Nicholas had a shipboard experience that led to his writing thereafter on metaphysical topics. Nicholas then represented the Pope in Germany, becoming known as the Hercules of the Eugenian cause. After a successful career as a papal envoy, he was made a theologian by Pope Nicholas V in 1448 or 1449, and was named Bishop of Brixen in 1450. His role as papal legate to the German lands included wide travels. His local councils enacted reforms, many of which were not successful. Pope Nicholas canceled some of Nicholas's decrees, and the effort to discourage pilgrimages to venerate the bleeding hosts of Wilsnack, the so-called Holy Blood of Wilsnack, was unsuccessful. Pope Nicholas canceled some of Nicholas's decrees, and the effort to discourage pilgrimages to venerate the bleeding hosts of Wilsnack, the so-called Holy Blood of Wilsnack, was unsuccessful. His work as bishop, trying to impose reforms and reclaim lost diocesan revenues, was opposed by Duke Sigismund of Austria. The Duke imprisoned Nicholas in 1460, for which Pope Pius II excommunicated Sigismund and laid an interdict on his lands. Nicholas of Cusa was never able to return to his bishopric, however. Sigmund's capitulation in 1464 came a few days after Nicholas's death at Todi, in Umbria. Upon his death, his body was interred in the Church of San Pietro in Vincoli in Rome, but was later lost. His monument with a sculpted image of the cardinal remains. In accordance with his wishes, his heart rests within the chapel altar at the Cusanestift in Cues. To this charitable institution that he founded, he bequeathed his entire inheritance, It still stands and serves the purpose Nicholas intended for it, as a home for the aged. The Cusa Sift houses also many of his manuscripts.